It seems to me that this should be a fairly brief podcast because our message is simple, 3 words: constitutionalize the court.
This is This Week in Common Sense.
I can't imagine that every American, when they find out that the number of Supreme Court justices is not in the Constitution, and that the Congress at any point could double it, triple it, quadruple it. And if one party controls Washington by the slimmest majorities today, 50-50 in the Senate, the vice president decides ties. The House, I believe they have, what is it, an 8-seat majority, something like that. There's a number of people who are, number of seats, I think 6 seats that are not filled at the moment. But it's a slim majority. And yet the Democrats could change the entire Supreme Court and confirm in one day, if they were hardworking, wanted to stay late, they could change the law. The president could sign it. The president could nominate 50 new justices. And Democrats would have 53 justices and Republicans would have appointed 6. So, and then of course, not only is that a problem, but then what's going to happen when Republicans have a majority, as they did when Trump was first in, they had the opportunity that they could have done the same thing. What would that do? Well, it would immediately say that whoever controls political power can just remake the court, and by doing so, remake the Constitution in the way that has led so many countries throughout the world to have, a nice constitution on paper and a government that, if you read a textbook about it, doesn't sound so terrible, and have zero freedom because their court system is completely crooked. And this is a serious problem. It's a serious problem in the US. I think almost every state court that I've ever had any experience with, I am, let's just say, extremely skeptical and kind of feel like they're crooked. And by crooked, I mean they're political and they make their decisions by what they want to happen politically. They're not independent. They're not fair. And it's a huge problem. And thank goodness for the federal courts. And I say this, having lost in federal court personally as parts of different lawsuits and different different opportunities to be in federal court. Because sometimes, oftentimes these days when I'm in federal court, it's because Citizens in Charge or Citizens in Charge Foundation or Liberty Initiative Fund are suing over petition laws in the various states or helping others sue over those laws. So, and the federal courts have been wonderful about that. But my argument is not that the federal courts are wonderful in every way, shape, and form. It is that they are the only branch of the federal government that even resembles slightly what the founders, the framers of the Constitution wanted. They wanted independence. And so, it is not good, the games that Republicans have played. And let's recount those. And I didn't really, in Monday's script, constitutionalize the court. I make the argument, put the number of justices in the Constitution so there's no more monkeying around with it by Congress. They have to come to us. They have to make a big change that everyone notices because it's constitutional if they're going to yank around the court. Because otherwise you get to a point where each party comes in and yanks it back and forth and we don't have any independence in the court. I'm Mr. Term Limits. I love term limits. In my political career, the most successful issue has been term limits, and the most time of any issue in terms of really actively pushing it, which I still do, is term limits, because I think it's a simple, straightforward, very beneficial reform. It's supported all across the political spectrum. But there's a difference between term limits for, and we're getting into Thursday's script, because on Thursday, I did a commentary called Term Limits or Death, and made the argument that I think term limits work even for the court, and that it's a better system for us to give judges, maybe it's an 18-year term because that's a multiple of 9, and every 2 years you'd cycle a justice off and you'd bring a new one on. And so Thursday at thisiscommonsense.org, term limits or death basically makes the argument that, it's been unseemly. A lot of the Democratic groups like Demand Justice have been saying Breyer should step down right now. How dare he stay on the court? Because, somehow if he stays too long, Biden might not be there. Republicans might take over the Senate. They couldn't change things. And so they want him out right now. Well, I don't really take a position on that, but he's 82 years old. He's been on the court for 27 years, and Clarence Thomas has been on even longer. He's a little younger, but he's been on longer. And I think the federal courts have been wonderfully independent. Mixed bag. We're all human. No system's going to be perfect, but the independence that the framers of the Constitution wanted, and that I think is absolutely essential to have real justice, that has worked with lifetime tenure. And after years of thinking at the state level of different ways that you could get the state courts to work, I'm now of a mind that the thing to do with state courts is to mirror the federal courts in every way, shape, and form. If you can't figure out another way to make it work, in other words, give lifetime tenure to state judges at the state level, or maybe you give them a long 20-year term or something, but you might want a way to remove them if they don't behave. There is that way at the federal level. It doesn't happen as much as it should probably, but there is that way. But you want the independence that the federal justices have, and that's not there at the state level. And our state courts are a mess. They're largely crooked, political, partisan bodies, and it's a shame, and it's dangerous. So I would copy the federal system. But here is, somebody who loves term limits, but I love them for legislators and for elected executives and so on, because you want to make sure that someone can't amass 51% of the vote and hold power forever. And you don't want people using the power they have, even from elective office, to parlay it into more power term after term after term. With the federal courts, it's different. For one, you could have term after term, but that hasn't worked at the state level, whether they're elected or appointed and then retained. It hasn't been a very effective system. It has at the federal level. And I think that the problem is the federal courts have been politicized at the Supreme Court level. And as I point out, and I can't remember now whether it was Monday's Constitutionalize the Court or Thursday's Term Limits or Death, but the fault of politicizing the Supreme Court has not been the justices. They have been decent human beings and got along with each other. They have shown, I think, tremendous independence. The justices that Trump appointed have not voted with Trump every time. The justices that Obama appointed have, well, maybe almost every time. But I'm being a little facetious. I haven't studied every ruling, but I think it's clear that and especially with Republicans, because they've appointed so many justices, like Ford appointing Stevens, who turned out to be one of the big liberal justices on the court. I mean, usually that takes a Democratic president to appoint.
It was on Thursday you made that comment that you didn't remember which day you made it on, that it was Congress and not the court that was corrupt, that was playing politics, that was using gamesmanship.
Right. And the president, of course, because you do see the tendency to pick younger justices who can stay for a longer time. And of course, you saw what the Republicans did, which we didn't quite, I mentioned that I was going to detail a little bit, and let me do that. When Obama picked Merrick Garland, There was quite a good bit of that election year left. And you could make the argument, which Republicans did, that in an election year, we should really wait and let the voters decide. Now, I don't know why we should do that, because the voters already decided. We put these people in, they have this length of time to do stuff. As long as it's within that length of time, why would you wait because there's an election coming up? It was an excuse. And of course, anyone who's read every one of our, what is it, 4,000 or 5,000 commentaries now, years ago, when that came up, I advocated that Congress bring up Merrick Garland and vote him down and say to Obama, unless you're going to get someone who improves the court, we're not going to vote yes. And that would, if I were a U.S. senator, I would vote for a judge if I thought this judge was going to improve the court. If I didn't think the judge was going to improve the court, I would vote against him, even if I thought he or she was a wonderful person. It's their judicial philosophy and that I'm interested in. And so I don't begrudge Republicans that argument, but I don't find it persuasive. I do think that it's legitimate for whatever party controls the Senate to, the Constitution says advise and consent. Well, I think I would say, look, I'm not going to consent unless I really like your pick. So let's get together and see if we can agree. And if not, then, the court waits. But that's not quite what the Republicans did. I mean, that is what they did to block Garland. And of course, the shock that Donald Trump is president, and you think about it, I mean, the difference between Donald Trump picking 3 justices and Hillary Clinton picking 3 justices is a pretty big difference. It's the difference between the 6-3 Republican nominated and confirmed justices against the 3 Democrat nominated and confirmed justices. And it would have flipped and been 6-3 for Democratic nominated. And I think Hillary Clinton would have picked horrible justices, in my view. And I have to say that I think Donald Trump, there were all kinds of places. I was very complimentary of him, for being the first president to kind of recognize that we got a real problem with the China-Nazis and to stand up to China in a way. And I think that was critical. There was also a lot that I think, he was a big government guy. He spent a lot of money. He seemed to think the government doing all kinds of things that it has no business doing was okay. But his court picks, I think, were the other thing that were really, really pretty good. Kavanaugh and Barrett, pretty conservative justices. I'm more of a libertarian. There's going to be all kinds of issues, criminal justice stuff to some degree, national security state stuff that I'm probably not going to like their decisions so much. But for the most part, they're better than the people that were on the court for the most part. And Gorsuch, as I've said many times, and we've written about him several times at thisiscommonsense.org. He I think is the best justice in my lifetime, and just a wonderful justice who follows the law. So he may not like the opinion he has to write, but he's going to write it. And I think that's all. I mean, that's the highest order of a judge. So anyway, the Republicans then, of course, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who didn't step down as Obama asked her to, and as other liberals demanded she step down, and had the audacity to just stay on the court until she passed away. Now Donald Trump gets to pick his 3rd justice. And of course, it's right before the election. There's hardly any time. And of course, my first thought, I have to say, because I wanted him to pick and not, Joe Biden, was darn well better make the nomination, and there's no reason the Senate can't do it. We one time, just a little tangent, but sometimes they'll say, well, that can't happen that fast. Legislatures and government moves as fast as it wants to move. We had a lawsuit that was about to be heard in federal court in Michigan challenging their residency requirement. And one morning, a bill in their legislature was kind of gut and stuffed, and the provision was put in to end their state's residency requirement, and which is what we were asking in our federal lawsuit. And later that night, that was law in Michigan. It passed. It was, in other words, it was introduced into another, kind of gut and stuffed into another bill, and sent through the entire legislature, House and Senate, in a day. So it's anytime legislators, well, that can't happen. Oh, it can. It can't happen for you, maybe, but it can happen for them if they want it. Anyway, I forget what that was even attached to, but I've always been amazed by that, because it kind of precluded our lawsuit, and it made it to where, we really didn't get into the lawsuit, which was great. We like to win, but it was funny how it was done. It was done in such a way that we put a lot of work in, and then all of a sudden they change it at the last minute. And it just goes to show sometimes they are watching, and they can act very quickly.
Did they expect to lose the lawsuit and decide that?
Oh,
and
yes.
So
Yes.
What was the point of caving? Just to show what?
Well, I think so that we didn't run up a bill, because in the end, after we win the lawsuit, we'll file, we'll say, look, this was a constitutional violation, and attorney's fees should be paid by the state. And I think we got 400,000 from Nebraska when we challenged and overturned their residency law. Almost all these residency laws are obviously unconstitutional, I think. And I'm not an attorney, I'm not a federal judge, but over and over again, every federal appeals court that's dealt with it, it's 3-0, striking it down. We just won a case in Maine, but there was a case in Montana that we lost. They ruled that, oh no, it's it's no big problem, no big burden. And I think it'll get to the Ninth Circuit, and they'll slap down that decision and reverse it. But
so this is a residency requirement for petitioners, not for voters.
Right.
Because you're actually a little bit different on that subject.
Well, I think there should be a residency requirement for voters, but not for petitioners. But it's interesting that we see in different states. I've been working some in Maine, and here's another tangent, but they have a rule that when you register to vote in Maine, you're supposed to, if you come from a different state, you're supposed to change your driver's license or whatever ID and other stuff within 30-day period. And they have 160,000 people who are voters in Maine but don't have any ID. And in some cases, those are going to be people in nursing homes who are registered voters, but they don't have any ID. They're not driving. They're 93 years old. Their driver's license is expired. They don't need another ID, or there's all kinds of different situations that you could be in. But the bulk of them, from what a number of people, myself included, surmise, are college students who live with their parents in a different state and don't change their driver's license from that state after they register to vote. But if they're in a state, and you can understand why someone, if you're voting in California or Wyoming, if you're a Democrat in Wyoming or you're a Republican in California, wouldn't you much rather vote in a state like Maine, where you might actually make a difference someday, as opposed to a state where your vote is just, you lose 80-20 every time you go to the polls. And so there's that. There's also a lot of people who have a second home in Maine. It's a nice place in the summer to go, and so on. And so you have a lot of people who vote twice, who have two homes. Years ago, when I was being harassed by the Attorney General in Oklahoma till he quit, but there was a case and it was over a residency requirement thing in a petition drive, and we prevailed in the end, but it was a little bit scary. But during that period, the mayor of Tulsa was found to have voted in Tulsa, where of course she was the mayor, and in Florida, where she and her husband had a home. Now, her husband is a resident of Florida, because Florida, by initiative, has passed wonderful protections for property owners and property taxes. So property taxes are low in Florida. They also don't have an income tax, which is why a lot of people move to Florida and start businesses. And anyway, they seem to have something going as far as those things go. But obviously, they don't want to, he wants to stay his residency in Florida. She's the mayor of Tulsa. You kind of have to have a residence in Tulsa, Oklahoma. But that opportunity to vote twice, if you want to, is there. And it happened in this case. Now, she said that it was not so. She did not vote twice, and that someone at her polling place in Florida must have just marked her name. And the local officials were so curious that they said, well, we're not going to look into it at all. At all. So and that's what happens with a lot of these situations. The Secretary of State in Maine has been urged several times to do a check to see how many people don't have driver's license and so on. And he found out in a hearing recently. But this is a situation in which you're allowing people to come in and vote in your state who don't really live in your state. And, it's not axe murder, but it's not right. And it seems to me that there should be an interest in weeding that out. And I don't think these people need to be in prison for, decades, guillotined, anything like that. But they need to be sent a letter that says, we need you to appear, and you might be fined some money for voting illegally. And again, with all the back and forth partisanship wise, it just seems to me that there's some basic things. It's like with the Capitol riot on January 6th, and we have it's Pam, isn't it? I think it's Pat who makes sense on the website, but in the comments we have a commenter, Pam, who and I think she ceased and desisted from this behavior now. I think I haven't seen a post lately, but for weeks and weeks after January 6th, she had a little post saying, why won't you talk about what happened on January 6th and condemn it? And of course, the commentary on January 7th was about that and did talk about it and did condemn it. And one of the things I pointed out is these people need consequences. And I'm not talking about draconian, get crazy. Just consequences. Some of them need to go to jail. Some of them need to be fined. Some of them maybe didn't do much of anything at all. And let's not pursue that. Maybe they thought everyone was walking in. I don't know. But in other words, there's individual circumstances, but the attitude ought to be, we're going to punish wrongdoing in a sensible, reasonable way that will tell people, hey, I better not do wrong, because then I know there's going to be consequences. And we pointed out that it was a problem that throughout the summer and all of the different, looting and riots and we call them BLM protests, but I don't think all of them were BLM protests. I think some of them were just people who did or maybe had absolutely nothing to do with BLM who decided, I want to go burn or loot or do something obnoxious and destructive. And we need to be against that. And we also need to, and I run into this with initiative petitions and the way they've always tried to go after fraud. Some of the same people who don't think there's ever any fraud in voting, if they find anyone did anything funny on a petition, it's fraud. There's fraud everywhere. And the truth is, look, we see the world around us. People are not perfect. People will cut corners. People who are allowed to cut corners all the time sometimes decide, maybe I can cut more of the corner. People sometimes do bad things. And the more they think they can get away with it, the more it happens. And so, we want to come down on any of these type things, and a response to petition signatures where there's fraud, where the solution is to rip apart the process, well, that's not smart. But I would never say, oh, there's never any fraud, and we shouldn't do anything to go after fraud. In fact, one of the interesting things we see in the initiative petition business is that when you point out fraud, when you want the state to come down on people who are, because they're defrauding usually the petition companies and the sponsors who are paying for these things. The state, if you turn it in, is going to find the fraud because they check the signatures. And if you're at all capable of doing a solid check yourself, you're going to find the fraud. And that means the fraud's against you because you probably paid them something to go collect decent signatures and they gave you garbage. You want that prosecuted, and almost never is it prosecuted because it's not going to get them big headlines. We have a justice system where the prosecutors, oh, I'm going to prosecute this more because that's going to give me big headlines. And it's, that's its own problem. But when you look at fraud in the voting process, it doesn't mean the response, I don't think that the last election was all decided by fraud. I don't know. I'd like more investigation. I see things that were done unconstitutionally, and you could call that fraud, although that's probably not the term I would use for it. But there were all kinds of things that could have been done differently. Let's look at it all. That election's over. It's not going to be changed at this point. But let's openly look at it all. And then after we look at it, let's look at the changes that are being suggested about voting. And if you find that there's a little bit of fraud, but not enough to have decided an election, it's still worth going after that fraud and saying, wait a second, maybe we ought to have voter ID. Maybe we ought not to allow ballots to just be sent to everybody. Maybe we ought not to register everybody, whether they want to be registered or not. And then as HR 1 or Senate S1, the Senate version, they would mandate that every state automatically register everyone to vote and then automatically send everybody ballots. So that you have all these people who have not opted in, who have not asked for any of this, and all these ballots floating around. And the other thing that it does is it will register a number of people who aren't citizens, who did not ask to be registered, but are being registered to vote. There's a specific provision in that federal legislation passed by the House that makes it to where you cannot be prosecuted for that. Both the non-citizen and the government person who puts the non-citizens on the rolls. Stop this automatic, throw everybody on some list. That's not how it works in a free society. The government doesn't just take people and throw them on a list and say, you will be a voter. And again, I'm not for it being tough. If folks in my state or any state want to have every government office offer you right then and there immediately a way to register to vote and be put on the rolls, or to correct your registration, or do anything to do with voting, I'm for it. I think it probably doesn't make sense on like fire engine, if you call the fire department, they shouldn't, as you're going, my house is on fire, they shouldn't be going, well, now first, I want to know if you'd like to register to vote. But, in a reasonable way, let's make it easy. Let's make it easy to vote. But I've pointed out things like, let's not make it easy to vote for 6 weeks. Because the problem is making it easy to vote in that way makes the election incredibly expensive and gives a huge advantage to entrenched incumbent politicians and their entrenched interests. And it allows big money to have more say so. And it seems like on all of these issues, It's like the Georgia legislation or the Iowa legislation. You look at some of these bills and they've been called racist and voter suppression. And then if you've done any due diligence to look at what they actually do and compare them to other states, if they're racist, horrible voter suppression, you've got all these Democratic states that have no early voting or a week of early voting and look, I a week of early voting I think is fine. I think there should be some. And again, if the people of a certain state say, Paul, hey, we want it this way, I'm fine with that too. Here's the problem. The people are not involved in this discussion. And so it's Republicans saying this, it's the federal Congress, which is Democrat controlled, wanting to dictate to every single state in the country that they must just automatically put everybody on the rolls and automatically send everybody ballots. And then you've got Republicans saying, no, we want to limit here and here. But the Republican bills that I've looked at, I expected them to be, to have some rough edges. I knew that they would limit early voting and in most cases, and I want that to happen. Now, their motivations may be different than mine, but I think that's a really important thing to happen to reduce the cost. But I figured they would be doing lots of other things. And it turns out that in almost all of these cases, what they're doing different is to tighten up and require some sort of proof that the ballot arriving in the mail is actually from the voter it purports to be from. And I don't have a problem with that. And again, I'm not alleging that millions of people sent in fraudulent ballots last time. But if you tell me there's an easy way to make it to where people can't really send in fraudulent ballots, I say let's do it. And if you tell me, but wait a second, it's a little more complicated than it otherwise would be to then vote absentee. Well, you want to vote absentee, you have a need to vote absentee, you're going to have to be willing to go through a couple of steps. And again, if anyone can show me this is a silly, stupid step that has no validity and no benefit, well, then let's get rid of that step. And again, you're going to have both sides who just pretend the other side is evil. They're usually right about that. And then they're also going to say that, this devastates everything. The voter ID stuff is ridiculous. And most people, frankly, don't believe it. But the media and other folks are going to act as if a voter ID requirement is going to totally change the electorate and suppress the vote a lot of places. And especially when you're talking about a voter ID requirement for a mailed-in ballot, where you're asking for a special, not just early voting, but you can vote absentee by mail, it seems to me that you should give something up. Now, we've gone on a big tangent, but I'm going to bring it back to what we were talking about with the court in this way. They don't care what any of us think about any of these election reforms. They don't plan to get in the weeds, both because they don't think we're smart enough to understand anything in the weeds, and because they're afraid that we might hear something that causes us not to listen to them call it a racist bill or Jim Crow or whatever. So they don't want us involved in that. And the truth is, any decent, public-spirited media people ought to be concerned that we have a Supreme Court where basic rules, the number of justices is not in the Constitution, but could just be whipsawed, changed every time there's a new government. That's crazy. It's not stable, and it's dangerous from a partisan standpoint. And we also have allowed, the vagaries of death to decide our timetables for our most important court. And that seems ridiculous to me. And again, None of these are talked about in that way. When I watch stories and read stories in the paper, it seems like it's always, well, the Republicans are doing this and the Democrats are doing this. And the court is all talked about in this, ping pong match between these two rotten forces, and not talked about as, hey, wait a second, this is our country. What kind of court do we want? And I think that if there was more discussion in that way, that the court packing is not going to come up and be pushed by regular folks who don't have a partisan, axe to grind. And what the Republicans pulled, and granted, they didn't steal. We took exception to one of the demand justice people who said they stole they stole multiple Supreme Court justices. They followed the rules, but they did it in a really obnoxious, dishonest way, because the rationale they used to block one justice, they threw out the window when it suited them. And of course, then we're not surprised, but we are disgusted nonetheless. And it seems to me that some of those rules might be written in to the Constitution so that we have a process. And it's not so easy, because you don't want to write every little move in the Constitution. You might even put it in law. At least that would require that the Senate couldn't just change it of their own accord. They'd have to get House approval and the president. And there's different ways to do it. But all of us have an interest in Republicans not being able to continue to play that game, and for the Democrats not to be able to play the same game they just saw the Republicans to play, and for the Democrats not to be able to pack the court because they don't like the game the Republicans played, and for the Republicans not to be able to come back in and then pack the court because they don't like the way the Democrats packed the court. That's my point about all of this election stuff. All of this stuff about the court, which is a co-equal branch and should not be dictated to and controlled by the Congress, within certain limits, you could see it, but not in a way where they could just completely restructure it at the drop of a hat. Those are things that if you're focused on government as how do we citizens control the government, none of these ideas are going to come up. Court packing and all of that, and I think that's a big problem, because our media is feeding us what the Republicans and Democrats are doing, and in fact, most of the time, they're not just feeding it to us, openly, objectively. They're feeding it to us with their own spin on it, as if it's gospel. And so we have to find ways to get beyond that, and that's why we talk about these things.
Well, that's 2 of 5. Did you want to skim over the other 3?
Well, we've been going a good while, and but I do think we can deal with the other 3 quickly. And I wanted to jump to query theory and microaggression first. This was Wednesday's. And first, I have to salute you, Tim, that is your title, the query theory, and with queer theory and some of the different things, I just thought it was. And this is all about a University of Virginia, my home state, a medical student who goes to a lecture about microaggressions and so on, and asks some questions. And apparently they didn't like the questions. There's no bad question, but things are changing. So they go after him, and they want him to make an apology. They want him to go through some sort of like sensitivity type training, as if he's committed some sort of awful crime because he asked some questions. It's not as if he came and gave some speech. He asked questions. And it's the sort of thing that when you talk about microaggressions, the problem is they're not aggressions in any real sense. they really fit. And I had a friend who took me to task on this. Remember, we and I told him, I said, I thought about doing a note at the end to just make the point that, look, there are caddish people out there, rude, obnoxious people who might say something mean-spirited. We're not defending that. But of course, you don't create some national tribunal to deal with that. You nip it in the bud when you hear it. Or a microaggression is somebody who says something that shows they have some kind of obnoxious stereotype that they don't maybe even understand, but kind of makes you, a little sick to your stomach. If they're, if I'm Irish, I probably wouldn't take offense because it's so ludicrous. Why would you? But if they were to, someone said, well, the Irish, they're all drunks. Well, you might kind of go, this person's kind of an idiot. But the thing to do is to say right then and there, that's a pretty stupid statement. Or to just not say anything and go about your day. But gosh, would you feel one iota of any sort of angst over that? No. But there could be, look, there's a myriad of ways to be obnoxious. So let's not figure that we've talked about them all. The point isn't, hey, it's okay to be obnoxious. The point is, these microaggressions are not aggressions. They're stupid statements. And this response is an incredible aggression. This is the state. This is the government, because that's who is the University of Virginia Medical School. And this is them saying, if we don't like the questions you ask, you will be very sorry. This is an incredibly serious assault on this man's free speech and all of our free speech. This is a macro aggression, and an aggression with real aggression in it. And so I think it's a very important story. And it strikes me in the way, well, I won't even go there because it'd take a while to explain that analogy. But this is people looking at a tiny thing that we ought to be able to deal with in our own individual lives without any government help whatsoever. And I've been there because I've heard people say things. I wouldn't necessarily call them microaggressions, but I'd call them saying something that I or somebody else thought was racist or sexist or obnoxious on some level, and seeing people, myself included, but my wife usually beats me to the punch, saying something about it and taking them to task right then and there. And almost always, everybody in the room, everything gets quiet and they hear it, and then people move about their business. But by golly, you don't hear them say that same thing again. And anybody who was offended by what they said is now maybe still offended, but maybe a little heartened to know everyone else thought they were a jerk too. But that's different than a society in which you have officials going after people because of questions they ask in a public forum. Those two things are just night and day. And one of the problems in modern society is our inability to differentiate things in any sort of rational way. And maybe that's part of it.
I've written about this quite a lot because I think it's funny. And I probably have a little bit different take than you, but we're basically agreed. A microaggression it justifies my micro defense. The people who push the idea of a microaggression just use the word micro to highlight the word aggression, which allows them to defend whatever the cause is in a meso or a macro way. That's what they're doing. They're trying to up the level of aggression. That is their purpose, is that they say, oh, that's an aggression, that little slight you made. And so I think that, once again, their problem is that they're trying to up the level of in the cycle of violence and aggressivity. And I think they're wrong for that. because you're right. An ill-mannered statement should be dealt with in the realm of manners, not in the realm of law. That's how I look at
Right.
that kind of thing. And I think we're in agreement on that. I would not agree that most so-called microaggressions, or even many microaggressions, are inherently bad or worthy of bashing down. Many of these are contentious issues. For instance, a lot of the trans issues we're talking about these days. I mean, I've used to have lots of trans friends, but I never called them, and they never demanded anything of me, right? But now they're demanding certain ways of talking about them, and I have no interest in complying at all, and I will insult them if they start their demands, and I'll even make fun of them. And this is a realm where I'm willing to be obnoxious, though I haven't been. It's just that I'm willing to be because I think that they're being obnoxious by bringing this to the realm of law.
Well, and I have no great depth of experience, but the few transsexual people that I know, I've just never heard a complaint about anything like this. I've never heard expectations not being, that the world's supposed to treat them a certain way and that not being met. And I think it tends to be complaints by people who aren't trans and who want to use it as some sort of political wedge. So, I think, and I see this, I think also, I've read so many articles about the anti-Asian hate. And I don't think most of it is really anti-Asian hate. I think in most cases, the incidents they're talking about is hate between two individuals who are of different races. Most of the incidents that have been detailed in these reports are African Americans and who have aggressed against Asian Americans. And yet the reports almost have this white supremacy tone in them, and then sometimes have that term in them. And of course, that doesn't quite fit. We're getting awfully silly about putting everything in different political, word patterns and so on, that all cause folks to walk on eggshells and to not communicate with each other. And that doesn't further any of these causes, doesn't further any of them.
Well, except that this is an interesting case in the sense that this man was asking legitimate questions, philosophical questions about the ideology that was being required of him. And that makes it very interesting indeed, because asking questions is the beginning of Western civilization, and maybe all civilizations. And we have to be able to query people in authority. And that might be people who are talking about issues like race. In this case, the man dared to ask the question, are the only people capable of microaggression those of a certain race? Is it race based, or is it on the issue involved? For instance, can a trans person commit a microaggression against a
cisgendered person? Yes.
That's a legitimate question, and it gets to the heart of postmodern theory about what these racism, sexism things means, and they have redefined the terms. They now believe it's about prejudice plus power, and then they define power in a very reductive way,
in a race way that says that the white guy on the street in Skid Row without a penny, addicted to crack and alcohol and 17 other drugs, is powerful because of his race and his sex. And I just don't know how silly you have to be to buy into that at that level. But we should point out that this med student, from his name, I don't know what his nationality is, but his name appears to be Indian, or maybe he's Afghani or Pakistani or something. But I don't believe that he fits the white Caucasian label. So it's not as if this is, and again, there's no allegation here that he asked these questions in a mean or abusive or any other type of way.
But asking questions of people who want to control you gets some feedback, and that shows their attitudes towards everything. In my opinion, I don't like them. I'm just against them. I think these people are tyrants by nature.
Well, they are, because one of the things you said, like one of the things you could say in America is, well, you know, your beliefs aren't going to stop you from getting the job you want if you're qualified or this or that. Well, yes, they will. They will in my state of Virginia at our flagship state institution's medical school. Yes, your beliefs will stop you from becoming a doctor. And that's, I mean, it just doesn't get any more serious than that. And if you hurt at thinking of all the racial discrimination and other discrimination, gender discrimination that's gone on throughout all of time, and we ought to hurt just a little bit. I mean, we can't spend all our time hurting, but it's horrible. It's terrible. You have to then hurt for the person who today, right in front of you, is being discriminated against for even asking a question that the dominant political view at our public universities don't like. I mean, it's serious, serious stuff.
And did you say this was the University of Virginia?
Yes.
So Thomas Jefferson's university.
Yes.
What would Thomas Jefferson say?
Yes.
I mean, that's quite an insult to the memory of that man. But of course, I'm sure the people who nixed the gentleman and suppressed his thought and hated his questions so much, I'm sure they'd like to take down every Thomas Jefferson element, because Thomas Jefferson was such a bad man, you know.
Right. Well, and you know, the interesting thing is, I always look at it and I think, Thomas Jefferson, we didn't know him. We weren't around him. He died a long time before our great grandparents, you know, were alive. And maybe he was a rotten guy. Maybe he was a really sweet, nice guy. Who knows? But if you judge him by all men are created equal, then, you know, you're judging him by his own standard, and he doesn't measure up. But his standard sure measures up. And I'm going to give at least a little salute to, thanks for phrasing that. Thanks for writing it down, and thanks for slapping it on a pole in different cities in the country that I happen to be born in a couple hundred years later. It's having some decent respect for people. And it doesn't mean you can't condemn things, but, and speaking of condemning things and respect, Major League Baseball has pulled the All-Star game out of Atlanta because of the Georgia elections law, a law that I think on balance is a good law, an improvement. And I think most objective people, even people who aren't where I am exactly on all these issues, if they read it and thought about it, would agree. But my problem, you know, maybe Major League Baseball, they're a corporation just like any other corporation. They're free to speak in our country. Maybe they have some real problems with it. I'd like to hear them articulate the problems they have with it. Let's hear them out. But we really don't hear any of that. We hear them sizing, you know, kind of teaming up with folks who hate big corporations, unless they're on their side, then they like them. But we don't hear anything about anything except, oh, this is voter suppression. In other words, they can repeat the headlines and they can say that's why they're doing what they're doing, but no analysis about the Georgia law, no demand that if they change this, this, and this, we will restore the game to Atlanta. No, in other words, they're not engaged. They're playing games to kind of snuggle up with those in power. But if you thought, well, no, wait, they've got, you know, you might disagree, Paul, but they believe in things. I wonder what they believe in, because my commentary, 2 strikes and you're out MLB, is about one simple fact, that the day before they announced they were moving the game out of Atlanta, they signed a deal with a Chinese company that's in with the state, the Chinese Communist Party, the China Nazis, and to send baseball into China. They get money, you get baseball. Is there a reason not to deal with people who our government has certified? They could be wrong, they're not, but on this one, but has certified is engaged in genocide. In other words, it'd be sort of like saying, and this isn't prior to people knew different things about what the Nazis were up to and had suspicions, but it wasn't as if the United States government said, we know that they are trying to exterminate the Jews. We know that there's a genocide going on. I mean, I think there were probably some reasons to be very, very much concerned that that's what was going on, obviously. But this is what is going on today. Our government officially certifies it is going on. Other governments have said the same thing, who've looked into it. There's all kinds of evidence. And you're going to deal with people who are engaged in genocide, but you will not deal with people who passed an election law that you deem to be suppressive of the vote in ways that you won't explain. That's Major League Baseball, and that's this whole corporate thing. And the truth is, I could see a corporation, for instance, George Soros. I'm not a big fan of George Soros, but I have to say that I respect the fact that George Soros spends money trying to advance his political ideals. Don't agree, but I have some respect for him, more respect for him than the guy next to him who might have just as much money, believe in the same stuff, but think, I don't really care what happens to the world. And so I can respect someone who disagrees with me, who believes in something different than I believe in. At least I can respect that belief. And here, this is crass, sickening identity politics by people who think it will earn them some extra dollars. And it makes me sick. And I told my youngest daughter, we were supposed to go see a ball game last summer, and couldn't go. And so she said, hey, we got to go this summer. Okay. So I've made a commitment. I will go to one ball game if she is going, and we can find a time. But I almost always go to a game, at least one, sometimes more. I can't, and I'm not as excited. I mean, the Tigers have a great new player who's hit home runs game after game, grand slams. He's just incredible, and I'm like less excited about it because I see the sport that I love behaving horribly, and anyway, that is very depressing. And the truth is that you kind of hate to get into a world in which everything is, well, then I'm going to boycott you, and I'm going to boycott you, and I'm going to cancel you, and I'm going to cancel you. But that sort of behavior begets that sort of behavior. And at a certain point, it's like campaign finance regulations. I had a good friend who was in a campaign, and the other side cheated in all kinds of ways. And after the campaign was over and it was obvious that they had cheated, they hadn't reported certain things that they should have reported. He said, I don't want to use these laws that I think are outrageous against somebody. And I said, you have to, or those laws never get changed. Because if the establishment can cheat and not follow their own laws, they're gonna just make them even tougher on us because they don't have to face them. And so it's sad, but that's we got to hit back. We have to do the tat for tat.
The problem, I guess, really is that this is rather like the problem with public goods and government in general, is that there are dispersed costs and
Yes.
concentrated benefits. And for the corporation sees the concentrated benefits of the interest groups that are pushing the woke agenda, and they see the people who disagree with the woke agenda as being not paying all that much attention to the subject, and they're much more interested in the actual products of their corporation. So they're not going to have the feedback that they think that would uh, be negative. And so the costs of annoying the anti-woke, so to speak, you might say the red-pilled and normies, which are the vast majority of people, are not anywhere near the benefits of appeasing the woke. And the woke therefore gain the upper hand. That's how it works. And so the only way around this is, as you say, is to get people who are against the woke to actually back up their statements. And this unfortunately makes everybody in society more political in non-political realms, is that we're bringing politics into everything. And this isn't going to be a nice time coming up, but there's no way around it, because if we don't do it, then we're just going to get
Yeah.
trampled.
Yeah.
That's just simply the case. There's
And
no way around it other than that.
in my view, I've always thought when they subsidize sports stadiums and stuff, I'm just thinking, this is so crazy because people love sports. Not everybody. Some people don't like sports at all, but people who do love sports, they love them so much. The idea that you would have to subsidize that, they will crawl over broken glass to go see these games. And so it's like, it's always just drove me crazy. But the truth is, these major league franchises are licenses to print money. It is hard not to get rich when you're selling these professional sports. And yet, mark my words, they are going to find ways to make these incredibly less profitable. And Major League Baseball, it's not the most popular sport. You don't give anybody concussions or anything half the time. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But the NBA has taken some hits in their viewership, Major League Baseball, NFL. And I think they're going to continue to take hits as long as they try to please Washington and not their customers. And they deserve it. They deserve all those hits. I hate to think that we won't have as much sports, but we'll find other things to do. We'll find our own. We'll find other ways.
Well, I hate sports. I can say that with a passion. Right? That it's just one of the things I don't like in this world. But I'm fine with other people liking sports. It's not that big of a deal to me, but I just don't like them myself. I mean, to my idea of a good game, I think volleyball is a good game. But I don't watch any sports. But one thing I am a partisan of, something I really enjoy, is Diet Coke. To me, this is the nectar of the gods. It may be the worst poison I drink, and it probably is. Even if I drink a bit of whiskey now and then, it's probably the worst thing I drink. But I love it. But this is my last glass. I don't have any Diet Coke in my house right now, other than what's in this glass. And Coca-Cola has recently come out in a woke way, and they
Yes.
piss me off. And I'm going to drink Diet Dr. Pepper or nothing at all. And if I find out Dr. Pepper is also, I thought it was Pepsi related. I'm pretty sure it's Pepsi related. But if it's Coke related, it's going.
I think it's somewhat independent as far as the label Dr. Pepper, because I'm a pepper.
Well, be a pepper, yes.
But it's bottled, I think, by Coca-Cola or something. I've been trying to get off of sugary drinks and sugar, but I like soda. I've always loved soda. Like as a kid, it was heroin, Oh, it's Dr. Pepper. Anyway, so I sometimes will treat myself to a soda, and I've gotten to where I've started to like Coke more than Dr. Pepper. Well, and my wife would buy Cokes. She doesn't drink them, and they would last a good while because I would never have more than one in a day. I mean, in the old days I would, but not now. But the last one ran out right about this time, and the other day I wanted something, the head was fizzy. I got a Mountain Dew. And my wife immediately said, isn't that a Coke product? I said, no. This is a Pepsi product. But it's the sort of thing where people will do that. And we're here's two of us. And it's not, to me, it's not really because I care so much about that Georgia law. It's not like that has to pass and that's the future of the world or something. It's much more a reaction to, you are messing around in my political world, in my free country, and you are doing it in an obnoxious way. Not only are you trying to block something that I think is positive, but you don't give a damn about it. You don't give a damn about it. You just want what you want. And boy, that's kind of there's a lot of bad places in hell, but that's a really especially bad place.
Well, I suspect there's some people in the HR departments of Coke who are Coke and MLB that are pretty woke. And so they may actually be earnest and be hoping that they're actually doing something good for the cause. I don't know if they have come to the conclusion yet that they may be ushering in a premature demise of their mania. Because what we have is the Democrats now has control of three branches of government, both houses of Congress and the presidency, and the Democrats are solidly on the side of woke ideology right now. And
yes,
I would say there's a good half of the American people that hate wokeism. Many of them are afraid to speak out against it, but they don't like it.
It's a very condescending, obnoxious, being woke. There's nothing wrong with that per se, but in our modern form, it's absolutely obnoxious. But here's the thing too. They control the White House, the House, and the Senate, and Hollywood, and television, and K through 12 education, and the university system, and most of the media,
and Twitter and Facebook.
And it just goes on and on and on. And there's going to be a problem. Now, we probably have gone long enough that we deal with that problem of the big tech and all of this, and this is a regular staple on This Week in Common Sense, and we'll keep talking about it. I want to just mention the last commentary. We're probably not going to get any help there, but it could be a variable, a wild card. And that is on Friday, our commentary was "Do not discuss this." And it is a commentary about, two things really. One, about the fact that we all kind of recognize that our government spends money crazy, and that we were like 20 trillion in debt all of a sudden after being, thinking it was pretty bad when we were 4 and 7 trillion. Now all of a sudden it's 20 trillion, and we're deficit spending $1 trillion a year. And then the pandemic comes and we're spending 2 trillion here and 6 trillion there and 3 and 1.9 and 2.4. And when you start adding multiple trillions up, it starts to get to be double-digit trillions, and we're in trouble, but we don't talk about it much. And we made the point in the commentary that one of the reasons we don't talk about it much is because it doesn't seem like there's anything we can do about it, and it's so frightening. And then we added to it something which, is kind of fun to talk about because it's off the beaten path and so on. But there's a serious element to it as well, and that is UFOs. And the fact that for decades, most of us kind of UFOs, it's some shadow, it's some light reflected, it's this, it's that. Let's not be silly. And our government always poo-pooing it. And then it coming out that our government has film, and that this isn't a report here or there, but lots of reports by people who are very credible pilots, and 3 people on that plane saw it, and so on, and they took pictures of it. And so we are seeing more and more about that. And yet the media doesn't cover it in much of any way except this kind of funny arm's length, let's make a few jokes and let's move on, and never again really asking for any real accountability from our government. Okay, what exactly is happening here? What do you know? What don't you know? There've been allegations that that they have alien craft, that they have aliens. Now, an allegation is an allegation, but these are made by some credible people, and there's no response. A categoric, hey, no, that's not the case, would be one way to deal with it. Acknowledging if it is, but it just gets to transparency, and we talked about this for years. One of the things that, if you go to that commentary, do not discuss this, at thisiscommonsense.org, at the end, it lists 5 other commentaries that we've done on UFOs, and largely on the lack of transparency by our government about UFOs. And when we first talked about it, a lot of times you go, I don't think you really want to deal with that, but it's really a fascinating subject. And we talk about it. And a lot of times I would say the same thing, which is, well, we ought to talk about it. We don't have to talk about, we somehow think this or that, or we know anything, but just why don't we know anything? And why doesn't our government come clean with us? And so we have repeatedly, as different things have broken, brought that to our audience because we think it's important. Not so much, you've followed it more closely and know a lot more about it than I do, Tim, but it's a fascinating subject. We only live in this world so long, and it's a big, beautiful universe. And I want to know everything I can know about it. And it seems to me that our government has treated us again like children. And to me, that's kind of the biggest issue. But it's also fascinating, just because it's an age-old question. And anyway, and it's also, I think, interesting, maybe not fascinating, but interesting, how we've been taught and trained to kind of compartmentalize it and to slough it away. It's this, it's something that we're not really supposed to think about.
Right. And I just listened to Richard Dolan, a piece that he did. I don't remember when he did it, but it's about the Robertson panel, which was the first official panel the U.S. government, the military industry, basically it was a Pentagon thing, to cover and come out with what to say about these phenomena. And he made the very interesting point that the panel was decided what they were going to say. And it had a political element. It was the Truman administration determining what presidents in the future and people outside of politics, what they were going to think about. They were very afraid of what the American people were getting interested in, because there were a lot of sightings of UFOs during the late 40s and early 50s. Lots of them. Most people don't even remember, though, that, for instance, there were UFOs over the White House. I mean, things that are peculiar. I mean, over Washington, D.C. and right over the Capitol building, and then they were hushed up and they were covered up, but there were headline stories in newspapers, and but the government started in 1954 when Eisenhower took over. The government had an agenda to bury some of this and to scoff at it and to make sure that academics didn't investigate it openly, and that the American people didn't investigate it carefully, and that it didn't, it's a very incendiary subject because it could bear on lots of things, including religion, right? And including the military integrity of the United States. Right. Both things are very, very obvious. And that's the point that people are making right now, and why the Senate is going to be briefed on this in June with a special thing. And that's one of the occasions for your piece. And I don't know if you've mentioned in the past, but this is it was What you say here, I mean, it was brought in the middle of a stimulus bill.
Yes.
What do you call that? You call that a gut and stuff? A gut and stuff? That was the something you said earlier today. A gut and stuff kind of a measure. Nevertheless, I guess the Senate's going to learn something. I don't know.
When do we get our briefing? That's what I'd like.
That's the very interesting thing. And I don't think we're going to get the truth. I don't think that they have any interest in giving us the truth. They're going to try to figure out some way of giving us half truths and lies, which is why I put up the quote from the X-Files on today's thought on the side. Did you see that?
I didn't see that.
Oh, I should show you.
You have to put it up now for everybody. But I've been had a crazy day.
It's something like the most convenient place to put a lie is between two truths.
Oh, I did see that. Yes.
There are ways that people with access to information can get us to think wrong about things, and they're subtle things. One of the things that I've been dealing with a lot in the last several years, and that's one of the reasons I bring the subject up a lot, and I pester you about it, is because I think it's easier to keep secrets than people think. And one of the ways to do it is to poison the well of public information. And when William Casey was charged by Ronald Reagan with, what is the CIA up to? Because William Casey became the CIA director during the Reagan years. And William Casey was reported telling the president of the United States that the purpose of the CIA is disinformation. He says they will have succeeded when everything the United States, the American citizens believe is incorrect. And that sounds awful, and you can't believe that anyone would say that. It sounds really bad. And then you realize, that's why they had to do it. Is there was an asymmetry of information between the Soviet Union and the United States government. We lived in an open society, and most of the information that was intelligence that we had and the Soviet Union had was public information, could be easily gotten. So the only way and it was very hard to get information of the Soviet Union. So how did we maintain balance? Well, the idea of CIA was to seed public information with disinformation. And that's the main mission of the CIA, is to keep disinformation in the public. And I think that's where we're at today, is that we're living in a society where the media is basically been major media has been plying the CIA craft and have been doing disinformation.
We don't get to it this week because it just broke, I guess last night or late yesterday. And but it came out, the Russian bounty story, which was a big thing throughout the campaign, and that basically it's low to moderate faith in the intelligence, which is kind of the intelligence agencies saying, no, we don't think that this is true. Now, what was reported in the news, in the way that they always report these things, like, boy, they know, even though they're talking to people they can't tell you who they are, was that the intelligence agencies had verified this is so, and Trump apparently is doing nothing. He hasn't talked to Putin about it, and Biden hit him on it. And of course, sometimes people get things wrong, but there's also no accountability at this point. No sense of here's the mistake that was made. We have ended our relationship with those sources, or we fired the reporter who got that. And sometimes a reporter can be fooled on something. I'm not necessarily going to fire them if they ever make a mistake or anything. Some accountability, some just tiny bit of sorrow that they misled people so much about that story. So but maybe we'll talk about that next week. But it's
perhaps along with James O'Keefe's big revelation about how CNN operates.
Yes.
That was an astoundingly interesting story.
Sounds like it's almost half written. Stay tuned. Well, I'm just thinking we got two little bits of media interesting media stories. Maybe I can put those together. So next week at thisiscommonsense.org, and we'll try to hopefully we'll, well, I don't know what hopefully we'll do, but I don't think we'll have the court constitutionalized yet, but I'm hopeful that gets into the discussion, because as I said, I think a week or so ago, whenever we talked about this last, I haven't heard anybody talk about that. There was actually a bill introduced. I should take that back. There was a bill introduced by Republicans this week. It came after we had talked about it, but they have a bill in that would put 9 into the Constitution. So I take that back. There at least has been some action taken in Congress, but there's still not talk more broadly. And I guess the media is waiting, but it seems like they don't wait on other stuff that they want to push. That to me is such a big issue that we would allow that to just be hanging out there. Our court could just be totally changed, drop of a hat.
Well, my only disagreement with that would probably be I'd rather it be 7. But aside from that, I'm probably with you on that.
Lucky 7, huh?
Yeah, I have a thing for prime numbers. 7 and 11 are my favorite numbers. Anyway, okay, very good. So this is the second full week of April 2021.
Thanks, man.
I'll talk to you later. Well, that's the end of This Week in Common Sense, starring Paul Jacob. Once again, my name is Timothy Verkala, and I just want to call your attention to 2 things. First, go to thisiscommonsense.org. That's where Paul writes 5 days a week. Commentary, since 1999. And the second thing I want to say is, Paul's prophecy that this was going to be a short podcast was woefully wrong.